very natural choice, basically because he had been working on species which are a real problem in India also. Starting from Chromolaena, Lentana, Mikania, all these species are major issues in India, and he has a large amount of years spent on research on these particular species. It's my proud privilege to welcome Michael Day to deliver the talk on successful weed biocontrol in the Pacific, opportunities for India. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Adana, for inviting me. Thanks to Sakana for the invite to attend and talk to her. Earlier we heard about the impacts of invasive species and how we should be addressing issues early in the piece rather than later. So I'm going to talk to you about some aspects about how we can manage invasive species at the top end. This is when it's gone too far. And I'm going to talk about biocontrol. So my brief was to talk about aspects of biological control or success stories in the Pacific with relevance to India. And there is relevance, because a lot of the good stories that we hear from other countries, we can apply to our own countries. So this is the South Pacific. Now I don't know if you can see this, but oops. What's happened? Where's the oh, that's what happens when you hand it to amateurs. Okay, so this is the South Pacific. I'm not going to talk about Hawaii, I'm not going to talk about New Zealand, I'm not going to talk about Australia. We've got Pitcairns and French Polynesia in the east, Micronesia up in the north, and then a whole lot of countries here just around Australia. So the region is fairly large, 30 million square kilometres, of which only 2% is land masses. There's a whole stack of islands, and most of these are uninhabited. Coral islands, coral atolls, we've got volcanic islands, large countries like PNG, small countries like Tokelau. So it's quite a diverse area, lots of seawater in between, trying to move biocontrol agents or trying to move agents around difficult stuff. So the impacts of weeds. Well, I'm not going to go into too much of this slide because you already heard it from Mike. But what Mike was talking about and applied to people who live off the land. And a lot of people in the South Pacific are agricultural farmers. And it impacts their livelihoods, impacts their life, food security, things like that. These are just some of the infestations that we see. The top left is all Lantana in Vanuatu. We've got Parthenium also in Vanuatu. Over here this is water lettuce, and this is Mimosa diplotricha. And all these weeds for this talk are all found in India, and so it's quite relevant to the country. Weed management. I mentioned 65% of the population in the South Pacific works on agriculture, and weeds are a major impact of agriculture. Because these farmers in the coral atolls, herbicides are not generally used, so it's manual control. So we're not only talking about impacts to weeds, but we're talking about time-consuming ways to control them. Herbicides in coral atolls, bad news. It's toxic to the waterways, and the lasting effects. There's human health risks with herbicides. A lot of these people are subsistence farmers, so they're not going to have personal protective equipment and things like that. It's expensive and it's ongoing because there's a seed bank. So herbicides, manual control, it's not long-term feasible. And I'll show you some examples. So biological control is what I'm going to talk about, and basically what this involves is the introduction of naturally co-evolved enemies from the native range where the weed occurs, introducing them into the country to control the weeds. It's safe, it's environmentally friendly, and it's sustainable because the agents are there forever. So biocontrol in the South Pacific started in 1911 with the first introduction of agents in Fiji and New Caledonia. Totally, you can see the stats. 64 agents deliberately introduced against 24 weed species. 36 of these agents have established. But what's so impressive is that 10 of our weed species in the South Pacific are now under total control. This means that no other control measures are being used to keep those weeds suppressed below economic levels. And 6 weed species are partially controlled. This means that some intervention needs to be maintained. 17 countries in the South Pacific, and there's 22 of them, have all deliberately introduced biological control agents at some point or other. The other 5 countries which haven't are very tiny countries where weeds are probably not an issue, and they've got more important issues like rising sea levels. Now, I'm not certain if you can read this. This is a list of weed species which have been targeted for biocontrol in the South Pacific. So there's just a few of them here which are relevant to India. So we have Chromolaena up the top here, Clidemia, we've got water hyacinth, Lantana's also here, Mikania. Mikania has been a target for biocontrol in India, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Mimosa diplotricha, it's been targeted in 16 different countries, or 13 different countries in the South Pacific, and it's under control. Another useful one. Parthenium, and the list goes on. There's a few others here. Salvinia, also found in India. Water lettuce, 2 of the Sida species, and Spathodia. So what I want to spend the rest of my time talking about is some of the successes that we've seen and how it pertains to India. So I'm only going to be talking about weed species which are found in the South Pacific, which we've got under control, and which could be relevant to India. So I'm not going to talk about species which we've done control over in the South Pacific, but we haven't done, which aren't problems in India. So the first one is Chromolaena odorata. I'm sure many of you are aware of the plant. It's a shrub, grows to 3 metres or so. 7 agents have been released on Chromolaena worldwide, but one in particular, the gallfly Coccinia connexa, is particularly useful, and India has also got it. So I just want to talk about some of the data that we've collected. So the blue line here is the number of plants per square metre, and with time, in 5 years, it goes down to 0. And the pink line is the number of gauze per plant. Might be per, yes, number of gauze per plant. And so, even when there's gauze on the plant, doesn't matter how many there are, the plant will start decreasing its growth and eventually it dies. So the picture on the right, this is a paddock in the Markham Valley in Papua New Guinea. This is all Chromolaena, and the plants are higher than me. So when we were walking there setting up our transects and our quadrats, we had to hold up big sticks because we couldn't see each other. And 6 years later, this is the same paddock. This guy here is about my height, and there's one little lone dead plant just in front of him. 6 years, plants have gone. These are some more before and after photos of the gallfly in Papua New Guinea. So we've got on the left, this is on New Ireland, one of the most northern islands of Papua New Guinea. And you can see 5 years later, that's all grasses, the weed's gone. This is not slashing, this is biocontrol. This is a paddock, I should say a coconut plantation, also in New Ireland. And again, 5 years later, all the weeds have gone. This is some data that we've collected to show the benefits of biocontrol. So in the top left-hand corner, we have the time spent controlling Chromolaena. And this is the change of, I should say, the change of time spent controlling Chromolaena after the gallfly. So you can see that there's a very small change of where the time spent controlling has increased, but 25% of the people, or sorry, a large number of participants or respondents have said that they only spend between 1 and 25% of their time now controlling the weed. And about 10% of people don't control the weed at all. So huge savings in time spent trying to control Chromolaena because of the gorefly. If you look at the graph to the right, top right, the graph is much the same. This is the cost of controlling Chromolaena, and you can see a huge percentage of the respondents don't control Chromolaena, or very rarely, or do less than half of what they were doing before, or the cost is less than half. Change of yield down the top, sorry. Change of yield down here. Huge changes of yield of cropping due to the removal of Chromolaena. And then the change of income in the bottom right hand corner is much the same as the change of yield, and as you would expect, because the two are correlated. So Chromolaena in the South Pacific under control by the gorefly, and we know that the gorefly is also in India, and it maybe needs to be moved around a bit more. Water hyacinth, it's an floating aquatic. Two beetles have been introduced, and they're probably the most successful biocontrol agents out there. You get better control with both beetles than just one working by itself. The agents are probably the most widespread biocontrol agents in the planet. They've been moved to almost 40 countries worldwide. We've got control in 21 countries. Phenomenally successful biocontrol agent. What tends to happen is that their impact on the weed tends to decrease when waters are eutrophic, and it could be because of fertilisers coming from agricultural systems, things like that. Both beetles are in India, and again, they can be moved around within the country. So this is some photos taken in Papua New Guinea. The top left-hand photo was taken in 1993. This is a large waterway behind Port Moresby near a sewage treatment plant, so the water is fairly eutrophic. 2 years later, we started seeing the brown mats, and another year after that, the mats had all disappeared or sunk, and you got basically clean water. And every time I fly into Papua New Guinea, as the plane lands, it actually crosses over, looks over this the lagoon. And for the last 10 years or 13 years, I've seen the waterway completely clear. It just stays clear. Biocontrol is working, and it just stays working. These are two photos taken in Vanuatu, the top one in 2004, the bottom one in 2008, 4 years later. Again, this is a result of biocontrol. Now, the interesting thing with biocontrol, especially of waterways, is we actually have a couple of things working for us. First of all, the insects will eat the plant, and because the larval stage eats the rhizomes or makes the plant waterlogged, the plant mats can sink. The other thing that insects can do is they can actually break up these water mats, or these mats of weed, and then when you get flooding, it gets flushed out to sea and the salt water kills it all. But either way, it wouldn't have happened without biocontrol. Lantana, we've heard about that earlier today. Huge problem globally. It's found in about 70 different countries. I don't think there's any place on the planet or any country which has got total biocontrol of lantana. It just seems to be one of those incredibly hard plants to control. Part of it is because it's a hybrid. It's not quite the same plant as found in the native range. A lot of activity being done in biocontrol, including in India. 44 agents have been released worldwide. We've got 31 of them been released in Australia. 19 of them have been released in the South Pacific. 29 agents have established globally. And the control is variable depending on the country and the regions. Some of the drier regions you get less control than others. And as I said, Several of these agents are found in India. Mikania micrantha, obviously a big problem, was mentioned in India, it was mentioned today, and that's something that Zinkaran has been working on. Fast growing vine, you found it's in Kolkata and elsewhere. It's present throughout the Asia and in the Pacific. I think it's found in 20 of the 22 countries in the South Pacific, and I think it's found in almost every country in Southeast Asia, maybe except for the Western Asian countries. There's a rust put out, Coccinia spegazani. It has been tried in India and failed to establish, and I believe efforts are being made to reintroduce it based on some of the success stories elsewhere in the South Pacific. The rust has been introduced. It's now found in 6 different countries, 5 of them in the South Pacific, 1 in Taiwan. So this is some work being done in PNG, which I was involved in. So the graph to the left is the growth rate of Mikania with and without the rust. So you can see that whether it's single stem or multiple stems, growth rates of Mikania will decrease with the introduction of the rust. The bottom right hand photo is just a heavily pustuled leaf. You can see it just curling up and it will die. This is some field data in PNG we're involved in. You can see the red line is the percent cover of Mikania. It started at 100%. We chose the site carefully so we start up with 100%. The black lines is the number of, or the average number of infected plants parts. So that's plant leaves, plant stems, plant petioles with pustules on them. And you can see again, there's no correlation on whether the plant has got X number of pustules or X number of plants. If the rust is there, growth rate will decrease, and with growth rate decreasing, so does the plant cover. So it's down to about 45% at this site. Phenomenal results, and this all happened within a year and a half. Mimosa diplotricha, I mentioned that a little bit earlier. There's a little psyllid, Heteropsilla spinulosa, fantastic little agent. It's really undervalued because it's been released in 14 different countries, 13 of them in the South Pacific and 1 in Timor-Leste, providing excellent control, but it's never been taken up by other countries. Quite puzzling. This is some of the work being done in PNG. The top right-hand photo. This is a large infestation of Mimosa diplotricha, and as you can see, the bottom photo, the psyllid has just defoliated the whole plant, and that makes other control measures such as burning highly viable. Mimosa pigra, related species, another important species, not found in very many countries in the South Pacific, but it is a major problem in the Southeast Asia, and it is a problem in India and growing. 16 agents have been released in Australia. We've got 11 agents established. A number of these biocontrol agents have been released in Southeast Asia, particularly in Malaysia, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam. And we do know that some of these agents have moved into other countries. Some of the biocontrol agents we know are present in Cambodia now. And Commentum mimosa, which is found in Vietnam and Malaysia, it's pretty moved up into Thailand and neighbouring countries such as Cambodia as well. And these agents, none of these agents have been tried in India, and they're pretty worthwhile to consider. Opuntia stricta, also a big problem in India. You've introduced Dactylapius, one of the Dactylapius species, highly effective, but you haven't got Cactoblastus cactorum. Now this particular caterpillar was introduced into Australia in the 1930s, and prickly pear or Opuntia stricta is still under active biocontrol within Australia. So 85 years later, we are still not controlling prickly pear by chemicals or slashing or anything else. That's 85 years of biocontrol with this plant is no longer causing a problem. And as I said, the agent could be introduced into India to help control prickly pear here. Parthenium, we know that Parthenium is a huge problem in India, and it's growing, it's getting into more and more areas, but there's active biocontrol around globally. you've got one beetle, Zygogramma, introduced into India, and it is present. We introduced it into the South Pacific and it didn't establish, but we also found this little moth, Epiblema, had naturally incurred into Vanuatu. It's a biocontrol agent. It came from Australia. And it is now controlling Parthenium in Vanuatu, and this relates, even biocontrol can be used at the early signs of incursions. So Mike, in his talk, was saying that we should do active control measures down in the left-hand corner of his graph. Well, Parthenium had just come into Vanuatu, and this moth had come in as well. So with a bit of luck and movement around of this moth around the other parts of the country, Parthenium will never become a problem like it has in Australia or other parts of the world. So you can actually implement biocontrol in the early stages of incursions. So this is the photo we took of a Parthenium patch near Port Vila in 2014, and a year later, or 14 months later, the infestation had disappeared due to Epiblema. Phenomenal little insect, and something that India should be considering. Pistia stratiotes, another aquatic weed, serious problem globally. Neohydromus affinis has been out there for about 30 years in various countries. I think it's established in 17 countries now, Africa and the Pacific, and does a phenomenal job. Control in most tropical areas within 2 years. Very good. But for some strange reason, and I'm not quite certain why, but it's never been released in Asia. None of the Asian countries which have got Pistia have actually introduced Neohydronomus. And there's an opportunity beckoning. Here's some photos taken in Vanuatu. This is the top photo, was a fairly large lake. It's probably the same size as numerous cricket fields. And 4 years later, the beetle had removed all the water lettuce from the site. Salvinia, also a problem in India and most Asian countries. Certibagus is probably the most widely released biocontrol agent on Salvinia. It's established in 21 countries, and it's also found in India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Sri Lanka. So there is scope that it could be moved around other parts of the country if it's not already there, but highly successful. So here's some photos taken in Papua New Guinea. The top photo in the left is on the Sepik River in 1983. A year later, you can see the mats were browny, and another year after that, you can see the waterways are fairly clean. And the bottom photos is the same Sepik River with and without Salvinia and the beetle. So the left-hand photo, this is an aerial photo of course, shows a green river of Salvinia. 2 years later, you can see that the waterways is essentially clean. Phenomenal agent. Cider acuta, it's a pasture weed. It is found in Asia, it's found throughout the South Pacific. We've released a calligrapher, a Pantherina, it's a leaf-feeding beetle, and it's established in 5 countries now. But again, it hasn't been released in Asia. And I think part of the problem is that cider sometimes is used as a bit of a fodder crop when grasses are low. The cutter will eat it. It's not a particularly useful plant, but I guess eating cider is better than eating nothing. So there could be a bit of a conflict of interest trying to control cider. And again, here's some examples of biocontrol. This is in Vanuatu. Top photo was taken in a pasture just outside of Port Vila in 2005, and 3 years later, all the cider has disappeared. So, biocontrol in India. Well, India's done biocontrol. In fact, if we go back a long time, in 1795, some cochineal was brought into India to use as red dye for the British Army's coats. Then a few years later, about 40 years later, they started to move the cochineal around the country to try to control some of the cactus species. And then in 1921, they actually made their first deliberate attempt to import a biocontrol agent to control some of their weeds. So what we have in India at the moment is 20 biocontrol agents have been deliberately introduced to combat 10 weed species. And because many of the Asian countries are contiguous, and we've already heard that weeds do spread, they don't know any boundaries, they cross land borders, they cross political boundaries within countries or between countries. Some of these biocontrol agents move around. So 9 biocontrol agents have actually been introduced into India on their own means or maybe on contaminated plants. So what we're having in India at the moment is 21 biocontrol agents deliberately or established on 10 weed species. And 5 of these weed species have had significant impacts occur to them because of biocontrol. So these biocontrol agents are having some sort of impact on our weed species in India. Strangely enough though, India hasn't released a single biocontrol agent for 20 years. And a lot of us in the biocontrol circles often wonder, why is this gap between introducing biocontrol agents? And we talked about that in the car yesterday as we were driving around Kolkata and looking at some of the sites. There seems to be this generational gap. Vietnam hasn't released a biocontrol agent for 20 years. Some of the other countries in Southeast Asia haven't released a biocontrol agent for many years. Why? Biocontrol is highly successful. Has it lost its flavour? So I'm not quite certain if you can read this, but I think the presentation will be made available to everybody if you want it. This is the table of all the biocontrol agents released in India and whether they've established or not. I can make this available. This is the list of biological control agents naturally spread into India. So this is agents that have just come in from one country to another. And then what I've done is I've made up another table of biological control agents which could be considered for India and that have had a highly significant impact against their target weeds in other countries. So the list is not the definitive list. There are other biocontrol agents on other weeds, but these are the main weeds that are the main problematic weeds of India, and these are the main effective biocontrol agents for those particular weeds. So it includes weeds like alligator weed, which I believe is also is thought about as using as a food source, as a green leafy vegetable. There's other agents for Chromolaena. There's other agents for water hyacinth. There's a few more agents for lantana. India doesn't have the lot. Mikania micrantha, I think there could be scope to introduce the rust. Insects for Mimosa diplotricha, Mimosa pigra could be considered. More biocontrol agents for Parthenium and crassipes. There's a lot more activity and a lot more potential that India can investigate. So the rest of my talk, I'm just going to talk about some of the other weeds that I haven't covered so much in the South Pacific. I'm going to talk about lantana. There's 4 biocontrol agents on lantana that could be introduced. One's a little bud mite. Was first worked on in South Africa. It's established now in South Africa, established in Australia. Stops flowering, stops seeding, so you don't get that spread of the weed. Eichhornia intermedia, it's a little sap-sucking bug. I think it's also something that India can consider. Opuntia kamari, it's a little leaf-feeding, leaf-mining fly, released in South Africa about 10 years ago, and within about 5 years it had spread its way up the eastern part of Africa into Ethiopia. So a highly damaging agent and very easily spread. And then there's a rust, Praspodium tuberculatum. Mimosa pigra, apart from some of the agents that I've already talked about or alluded to, there's also 3 others that have been only introduced into Australia and could be considered for India. Parthenium, and we've mentioned this before, there's a couple of agents that could be introduced into India if there was political will and resources. So, some of the weed options. Again, earlier today we talked about we should target, if we can prevent weeds coming into the country, better. If we can target them when they're eradicated, even that's the next best thing. But when they're established, what do? Well, we can do nothing if we like, but the weed is not going to go away. It's not going to get any better. It's just going to keep increasing and infilling and spreading. And in extreme cases, like the see that in the top right-hand corner, farmers might have to walk away. This is a cactus infestation. You just can't do anything with that. You can't spray it. It's just too big an area. You can spray. You can try it with herbicides, but how are you going to get into all those areas? You can use herbicides, and we've talked about all the negative effects of herbicides, so I won't go back into that. The bottom photo is Mimosa pigra. And if you don't act on Mimosa pigra, that's the sorts of infestations you're going to have. You're not going to be able to walk through it. It's a thorny bush, grows to 3 or 4 metres. It's impenetrable. You can't get cattle through there at all. So, why biocontrol? Well, it's environmentally friendly and self-sustaining. I mentioned about the prickly pear story in Australia. 85 years of constant biocontrol, constant control. We do not spend money on controlling cactus. It's good against weeds where other controls are prohibitory. So you can imagine the weed infestation. This is a lake in northern Queensland. This is all Salvinia. If you try to spray it, you're going to poison your waterways. You can mechanically remove it, but Salvinia doubles its weight in 7 days in summer. So unless you can get rid of half the biomass within a 7-day period, you're back to where you started from. Now the helicopter pilot who was spraying this dam back in the 1980s said after about 3 or 4 runs of spraying it with herbicide from aerial application, this is impossible. I've been doing 5 runs, the plant comes back sooner than I can spray it again. This is not feasible to do. When we put biocontrol agents out there, within 18 months, that's the size, that's what happened to the dam. 18 months, all the Salvinia had disappeared. And the helicopter pilot could not spray that in the same period of time. The other thing about biocontrol is we're relying on co-evolved host-specific biocontrol agents. We're not just relying on grasshoppers that eat anything. We're talking about insects which are collected from the plant in its native range and introducing them into another country. And we can do all these wonderful tests to show that. And biocontrol has been successful in many countries. It's proven. And I'll show you some statistics in a minute. 80% of biocontrol projects are successful. And the cost-benefit ratios are huge, almost 100 to 1. I'll include that. So, here's some statistics for biocontrol. It's got a high success rate. 83% of projects in South Africa have been successful. 80% in Australia. The cost ratios of all biocontrol projects in Australia is 23 to 1. So this means every dollar spent in biocontrol research reaps a 23 to 1 return. You don't get that in a bank, you don't get that anywhere else. The individual cost ratios of weed species, of individual weed species, can be in its thousands. So in South Africa, the ratios vary from 34 to 1 to over 4,000 to 1. So imagine you putting in $1 and getting $4,000 from your return. You're going to invest that money. And the reason why it's so high is because biocontrol is there forever. So for 85 years in Australia, we're not spending a single dollar on controlling prickly pear. So the amount of money on the individual research of biocontrol of prickly pear stays the same, but the benefits keep extending every year that you do not spend any more money. West Indies, 126 to 1. Even Zambia, which doesn't do a lot of biocontrol, was returning $11 to 1. Huge benefits. In Australia, I talked about the overall average is 23 to 1. And this includes projects where we didn't get much success, such as lantana. Our cactus species are 300 to 1. That's all our cactus. Rubber vine, Parthenium. Parthenium is 80 to 1. Phenomenal success rates. And even if you do a slight decrease of say you've introduced a biocontrol agent, like such as on Lantana, and you had a slight decrease, like a 5% decrease, you still get 9 to 1 return. Because the insects are slowing down growth, or they're reducing the amount of seed produced, and allows farmers a bit more time to control their weed, and they get better return for other control measures. So biocontrol, here's some other statistics. 91 countries in the world have deliberately introduced at least one biocontrol agent. And biocontrol has been going since 1902 deliberately. 91 weed species have been targeted for biocontrol. Nearly 500 biocontrol agents have been released globally. Some of the agents have been thoroughly tested. I think some of the water hyacinth insects, over 200 species, have been tested in 10 different countries. And I think even the Mikania rust now is up to about 300 different species being tested. So we know that for many biocontrol agents, not only are they effective, but they're entirely very safe. They've been tested thoroughly by numerous countries. And they've also been out there for 20 or 30 years, so we would have seen any off-target impacts. If they were going to attack anything else, we would have seen it in the field by now. So a lot of the things that India or any other country in the Southeast Asia could look at is look at agents which have been proven highly successful elsewhere. And some of these agents have been released in over 25 countries. Some of the biocontrol agents on Lantana are over 30 countries. The water hyacinth insects are close to 40 countries. So there is success, there is a proven record for some things. And that's what we should be looking at. Looking at the things where the research has already been shown to be safe and sound. If you look at the photo on the right, this is a lagoon on the Sepik River in Papua New Guinea. So you can imagine trying to control that with herbicides or manual means. I don't think you're going to do it. And even if you could, it'll be a continuous effort. You are going to have to continually move that plant from the waterways for the rest of your life. But if you put biocontrol agents out there, like the bottom photo, you've got control, and the insects do your work for you. So, in summary, there's many highly successful effective biocontrol agents already in India. There's numerous agents which are already present in Asia, and they could be introduced into India. And there's many more insects or highly effective biocontrol agents which are found globally, such as Australia, South Africa, or the South Pacific, which are also could be considered for India. Because we know that weeds move across political boundaries, biocontrol agents also do the same thing. It might be prudent to have a look at what's already in India before we start introducing biocontrol agents. They might already be here. For instance, I've been doing some work with some Southeast Asian countries, Cambodia in particular. They actually never released a biocontrol agent, but they've actually got 3 or 4 species already in their country, because Thailand to their west, Vietnam to the right, or to the east, have also done biocontrol, and these agents have moved across. When I was in China last year, I found 6 biocontrol agents never previously been introduced into China or previously recorded, and they had also come from their neighbouring countries. So these things move. So I just want to re-emphasise, biocontrol is safe. It has got a proven record. There are no significant off-target impacts. Some of the agents are highly successful, and they can be moved across to other countries. And something that India, if you want to control your weeds, reduce the costs, you can consider biocontrol from some of these things. So I might leave it there. Thanks very much. Questions? Oh, lots.
Dr. Dey, I'm very skeptic about the introduction of biocontrol agent by beetles or some kind of insects in India. A lot of trials have been made, as you have listed out in India. success rate is 2-4. And secondly, the paste we were introducing for control of weed, sometimes they are not target specific. They gone out. They sometimes attack the crop species also, not the weeds. So because they are not target specific. So in India, the trials, whatever made in the past, is not too much effective in that case. So what did you think about the use of biopaste or integrated management of the whole weed system instead of herbicide use? And moreover, I am not considering it is a environment friendly, because the pest we do not know much about the pest because they are not target specific. They may, in the long run, they may be, many cases it was introduced, particularly with respect to Parthenium. The story is very bad experience for India. That's the thing we can say about at this moment.
What I'm particularly advocating here is I'm only looking at bona fide biocontrol agents which have undergone host specificity testing and are proving safe. Anything which has not undergone host testing is not being recommended for releasing it in India or any other country. So these agents have been tested and do not have impacts. And I will challenge people to go and find water hyacinth insects on any other plant species. And I wouldn't be standing up here advocating biocontrol if I firmly didn't believe in that. Regarding integrated control, for weeds such as lantana, it's probably a good thing to do because the biocontrol agents out there, they're not that effective. They don't attack anything else, but they're not controlling lantana as we would like it to. And so where you might get a suppression or damage on a seasonal basis of lantana, you might have to do other control measures and take advantage of that seasonal damage. So biocontrol is not necessarily the answer for every weed. I can list, I think Sankaran and I were looking at weed species in India, and there's probably about 250 alien species in India, and only about 50 of those are biocontrol targets. So there's 200 species in India, at least, which are not biocontrol targets. I'm not advocating and I'm not talking about those species. I'm only talking about weed species which have been targeted for biocontrol in other countries and has proven successful. So it is a small subset of what we're looking at. Okay.
So the host and the prey-predator relationship as a biocontrol agent, how effective can that be? Is it possible that both the prey as well as the predator come down to say 10% or 5%, stay there at the dormant stage, and then again flare up? Can that happen?
So biocontrol really is a predator-prey model. What the aim is to bring bring the weed population down. I don't have a graph for it, unfortunately, but the aim is to bring the population of the weed infestation down below an economic threshold where it's no longer causing damage, or it's under adequate control and doesn't cause environmental or economic damage. So obviously when the weed population decreases, the insect numbers will also decrease, and then they stay in harmony or some sort of equilibrium at a low level. But every now and then you do get stochastic events. So if you get a flooding event or you get a fire or something, a local population of weed could increase. And we do get this on prickly pear in Australia, where we find that for some reason the population of moths have died out or locally exterminated. The prickly pear will start increasing a bit. But the moths are always, they're present in the environment from elsewhere, and they'll move across and they'll eventually decrease it again. So you get these population oscillations all the time. Sometimes they peak, but in general it comes back down to a balance. It's not a perfect system because with lantana, the rotation is up here somewhere. So so it's still causing a problem. But for prickly pear, it's down to a low level. And for the water weeds, that also varies. So in some waterways, especially with the clear ones, you might get very good control constantly. The dam at North Queensland I showed you near the end, that waterway is still clean from Salvinia. But occasionally, you might get a flooding event and out goes your weed. And all the weeds disappear. So in hyacinth, which sets seed, they've left a seed bank behind. So what may happen, the weed disappears along with all the beetles, the seed bank germinates, water hyacinth comes back, you might have to reintroduce your agent there because the population disappeared due to flooding. As removed your biocontrol agents, you need to reinfest. So it's not the perfect system, but when it works very well, and there's no off targets. And so, again, I just want to clarify that we're not talking about all weed species. Biocontrol is not. If you've got a patch of weed here on the dais, pull it out by hand. We're talking about huge infestations which are beyond human intervention. And we're only talking about those weeds which have been deliberately targeted with biocontrol elsewhere in the planet, with proven track records of safety and effectiveness. Okay? So I just want to bear in mind, I think tomorrow I'm talking about host specificity or risk assessment. Is that right? True. So what I'm going to talk about, I think, later on in this workshop is risk assessment in weed biocontrol and how we can show that when we release a biocontrol agent, we know it's going to be safe. So I'll deal with that in another session. Is that right? Any other questions?
Okay, so today will be available again for the next couple of days, so you can always get a chance to ask further questions. So we should move on to the next.
Thanks very much.